If you've ever played adult rec sports like softball, 5-on-5 soccer, or flag football, then you're familiar with the idea of a ringer. We've all played against or even been on the team that brings in a former pro or college athlete for the championship game because they value winning a rec sports tournament over being good people and just playing fairly. But in NASCAR, hiring a ringer is encouraged because there is money and trophies on the line. Many of you watching this are too young to remember NASCAR's golden era of the road course ringer. There was a time where several teams fielded extra cars or replaced their full-time drivers with a road course specialist. Team owners did it when their teams were low in points, their regular driver was atrocious on road courses, or because they just felt that having a specialist in their car gave them a better chance of winning. Today, the ringer is all but a thing of the past, at least at the Cup Series level. Today we'll take you through the history of the road course ringer, highlight some of the most prominent, and end with a case study on why they disappeared. The road course ringer, a strange starter. Our story begins in January of 1963 at the 2.62 mile or 4.09 kilometer if you're not from the US, 9-turn Riverside International Raceway in California. This race was won by none other than legendary American racer Dan Gurney. He drove the number 28 Ford for Holman Moody and led the most laps on his way to the victory. Now, we're not completely sure if this was the first ever start by a road course ringer in NASCAR, but records from that era are spotty at best, and through our online research, this is the earliest example that we could find. Gurney would win the race at Riverside for the next 5 years, driving for the Wood brothers in the number 121 Ford. That's right, a 3-digit number. Dan also made starts on oval tracks, including a couple of Daytona 500s, with a best finish of 5th. He made his final NASCAR start at Riverside in 1980, driving for Osterlund Racing. Gurney blazed a trail for road course ringers in NASCAR, but few came to the party until the 1970s. Mark Donohue was the next ringer of note to show up. Like Dan Gurney, Donohue was a once-in-a-generation racer. He won the Indy 500, raced in F1, won an SCCA runoffs, and won the inaugural International Race of Champions. Donohue raced at Riverside in 1972 and 1973, driving the number 16 Penske Matador, and he won the race in 1973. Donohue would unfortunately be killed during a practice session for the 1975 Austrian Grand Prix, so who knows how many more NASCAR races he could have competed in and won. The next ringer worth spending time on is none other than IMSA and Trans Am wheelman Tommy Kendall. Kendall made his NASCAR debut at Riverside in 1987, driving the number 76 Spears Motorsports Buick to a 38th place finish after a mechanical failure. He'd return to the number 76 in 1988, faring a bit better with an 18th place finish. In 1989, he'd drive at Watkins Glen in an extra entry for Hendrick Motorsports. He'd drive the number 18 Chevrolet to a 27th place finish. 1990 would see Kendall's greatest NASCAR success. He drove the number 40 Chevy for Reno Enterprises at Sonoma and Watkins Glen, earning an 8th place finish at the Glen. He also attempted 3 oval races later that season, making one start at Rockingham, finishing 26th. Kendall would continue to act as a ringer on the road courses throughout the 90s, making starts for teams like Team Sabco, Jimmy Means, Junior Johnson, and Bill Elliott's team. But he would never eclipse that 8th place finish in 1990. We'd be remiss if we didn't take a moment to also mention Dick Johnson. No, that's not a joke. That's his actual name. Dick Johnson is one of the most decorated drivers in Australian motorsports history, a 5-time Australian Touring Cars champion and a 3-time Bathurst 1000 winner. If you don't know much about Bathurst, it's one of the hardest races in the world to win. It's one of the hardest racetracks to drive on. You're driving up a mountain around blind corners and back down the other side. Dick Johnson fielded his own team in NASCAR in 1989 and 1990, making 7 starts overall, with his debut coming at Sonoma. Now, he wasn't really a road course ringer because he only made 2 road course starts and ran 5 oval races, but come on, his name is Dick Johnson. Are we just supposed to not talk about him? So we've reached the 90s and we're about to begin the rise up the mountain to the peak of the road course ringer era. We're going to be introduced to some of the most beloved ringers of all time. Let's start with the man himself, Boris Said. Now, Boris Said first appeared in NASCAR in the Super Truck Series in 1995 at Sonoma. He drove for Mark Simo in the number 4 truck and finished 24th due to mechanical failure. Boris continued to race trucks for the next few seasons and even ran the complete schedule in 1997 and 1998, winning at Sonoma in 98 and having several strong runs on oval tracks. He was never a legitimate championship contender, but he was a serviceable driver in the Truck Series. In 1998, Boris won the pole in his Busch Series debut at Watkins Glen, driving for Jimmy Spencer, but finished 40th after losing an engine. He'd make his Cup debut in 1999, qualifying second at the Glen and leading 9 laps, but again losing an engine and finishing 40th. Over the next several years, Boris would continue to make starts at both Cup and Busch Series road course events. Usually he'd be racing in either an extra car for a team or as a relief driver. In 2001, he drove for Jasper Motorsports at Sonoma and Watkins Glen, replacing their normal driver Robert Presley. Presley was so far out of the championship anyway and wasn't really the best on road courses, so the team replaced him with Boris. In 2003, he won the pole at Sonoma driving the Army car for MB2 and would go on to even make some oval starts for the team in 2004 and 2005 in a third number 36 entry. In 2006, Boris shocked the world by winning the pole for the Pepsi 400 at Daytona and finished in the top 5. It was his best ever oval finish in Cup. Boris continued his normal road course ringer trajectory over the next few seasons and again shocked the world in 2010, winning the Nationwide Series race in Montreal in the number 09 RAB Racing Ford. This would be Ced's only win in the Xfinity Series. It was one of those days where everyone was just happy to see him win. But let's be honest with ourselves, what do we really remember Boris Ced for?
I'm more upset with Greg Biffle. He's the most unprofessional little scaredy cat I've ever seen in my life. I went over there to go talk to him. He wouldn't even let me get out of the car, and he comes over and throws a few little baby punches, and then when I get out, he runs away and hides behind some big guys. But he won't hide from me long. I'll find him. I won't settle it out in the track. It's not right to wreck cars, but he'll show up at a race with a black eye one of these days. I'll see him somewhere.
One of Boris's biggest ringer rivals during the 90s and 2000s was none other than Canadian legend Ron Fellows. If you're a Canadian race fan like me, then you know all about Ron Fellows. Daytona 24-hour winner, Le Mans winner, American Le Mans Series champion, and true Canadian hero. I'm serious. He should be on our $5 bill. He should have a statue of him at Parliament Hill in Ottawa. You could just replace that eternal flame thingy or whatever it is, statue of Ron Fellows. Ron made his debut in NASCAR in the 1995 Cup race at Watkins Glen, driving the number 68 Chevy for Canasco Racing, but lost a cylinder and finished 35th. He drove for James Finch in the Busch Series at the Glen in 97, qualifying 3rd and finishing 25th. 1997 also saw the beginning of several Truck Series appearances for Ron. He drove for Billy Hess in the number 48, debuting at Texas on the oval, but won Watkins Glen from the pole. In 1998, he ran 5 more truck races for Hess, got the pole at Watkins Glen, but only had 1 top 10, at Texas of all places. He also drove Buzz McCall's number 96 Cup car at the Glen that year and made his only Cup Series oval start at New Hampshire. He finished 36th. Fellows' crowning achievement of 1998 was winning the Busch Series race at Watkins Glen for Joe Nemechek's team. In fact, he'd win for Joe in the Busch Series 2 more times at the Glen in 2000 and 2001. He'd also take Joe's number 87 truck to victory lane at the Glen in 1999. Ron would continue to act as a ringer for several different teams throughout the 2000s and early 2010s. He drove both road courses for DEI in the number 1 car in 2003 and returned to that car in 2004, finishing 2nd at the Glen to Tony Stewart. Ron revealed later on in interviews that he'd had serious discussions with Dale Earnhardt about driving full-time for DEI in the early 2000s. This could have been a slam dunk considering his relationship with General Motors through their Chevrolet brand. Unfortunately, Dale Earnhardt's passing shelved the possible deal. Fellows raced as a ringer for various teams from 2005 to 2013 in both the Cup and Xfinity Series. He drove for Hall of Fame Racing, PPI Motorsports, and Kevin Harvick's team, to name a few. He also spent several years driving for Junior Motorsports, and on a fateful day on the Montreal Island in 2008, Ron went to victory lane in NASCAR for the final time. Ron won a wet and wild race. It was the first race in NASCAR history to require the use of rain tires, and Ron was masterful. Eventually, the rain got too heavy to race, and NASCAR called it early, giving Ron the win. Ron Fellows' Montreal victory, a part of our heritage. Nowadays, Ron Fellows is the owner of Canadian Tire Motorsports Park, northeast of Toronto, Canada's only city. He spends his days scolding double parkers and driving heavy machinery to prepare his facility for race weekends. A true Canadian legend.
Hi to my family at home. Hi to my family at home. Hi to my family at home.
Hi, Scott. Scott Pruitt is such a family man.
Hi to my family at home.
He's also one hell of a road racer. But Pruitt didn't come to NASCAR as a road course ringer. He actually came as a full-time Cup driver in 2000 for PPI Motorsports. Yep, he drove the Tide Ride. He came over from PPI's kart team after spending the earlier part of his career in sports cars and open wheel. Oh, be sure to check out Uppity on Netflix. You get to hear a great story about the time Willie T. Ribbs clocked him in the face at Watkins Glen. Scott's 2000 season in NASCAR was a dismal failure. He had just one top 10, which actually came in Indianapolis. He was released from PPI at the end of the year, and this is when Scott became the ringer that we remember. In 2001, he drove at Sonoma for Andy Petrie, and then began a long relationship with team owner Chip Ganassi. He replaced Jason Leffler in the 01 car at Watkins Glen, finishing 11th, and also won the pole for the Busch Series race at the Glen, driving for Kevin LePage. In 2002, he replaced a struggling Jimmy Spencer in the number 41 Target car at Watkins Glen, earning a 6th place finish. In 03 and 04, he drove an extra Ganassi car at the road courses, earning a best finish of 2nd at the Glen in 03. He continued as a fill-in driver the next 2 years, driving in relief of Sterling Marlin in 2005, earning another top 5 finish, and he replaced David Stremme at the road courses in 2006. He made his final Cup start at Sonoma in 2008, filling in for Reed Sorensen. We mentioned Pruitt's Busch Series pole in 2001 earlier, but he also won another 2 poles in the series at Mexico in 07 and Montreal in 08. Pruitt never managed to win a NASCAR race at any level, but boy did he come close in 2007 until Juan Pablo Montoya dive-bombed him. They were teammates, by the way. Scott retired from NASCAR after 2008, but continued racing for Ganassi and Grand Am, winning countless races and 6 championships. So we've taken quite a lot of time to go through some of the more prominent road course drivers, but there have been dozens of road course ringers. I unfortunately don't have the time or, to be honest with you, ambition to edit for hours on end to mention all of them, but here's a few that we think are pretty cool. Corvette racing legend and former F1 driver Jan Magnussen drove for Phoenix Racing at Sonoma in 2010. He started 32nd and finished 12th. Belgian driver Mark Goossens drove in both the Cup and Xfinity Series in 2006 for Robert Yates Racing. He led a couple laps in the Mexico race and finished 9th. Max Pappas started out as a ringer for McGill Motorsports in 2006. He also drove for Phoenix Racing and Rusty Wallace's team in the Xfinity Series. He even tried his hand at being a full-timer in both Cup and trucks, and that didn't really work out too well for him. Oh yeah, and he slapped Billy Johnson in the face at Road America, and then got slapped in the face by Mike Skeen's girlfriend at CTMP. Apparently she was banned from NASCAR events for life. 1997 F1 World Champion Jacques Villeneuve wanted to be a full-time Cup driver and did make a couple starts for Bill Davis in 2007, but ended up serving as a ringer for several years. He drove for Penske and Braun Racing, and go figure, he wasn't well liked for some of his on-track antics. One of my favorite weird ones is Matthias Ekstrom. He was a Red Bull sponsored driver in the German DTM series, and he drove the number 83 for Red Bull at Sonoma in 2010. He actually led several laps and ran in the top 5 most of the day, but had to settle for a 21st place finish. In a cool turn of events, Red Bull actually let him drive on an oval at Richmond later that year. He finished 31st. Remember this move?
Oh, one last ditch effort as he gives it to Alex Tagliani.
Oh, he knocks him out of the way.
He sent Alex Tagliani wide. Regan Smith right on the second last corner will win Mid-Ohio.
It cost Alex Tagliani a dominating win at Mid-Ohio in 2015. But to be honest, I'd have done the same thing. That's just racing. If you love to win, you move that guy out of the way. Tags is a former IndyCar driver and Indy 500 pole sitter who is now a regular driver in the NASCAR Pinty Series. He served as a ringer for several Xfinity and Truck Series teams, including KBM, Brad Keselowski Racing, and Team Penske. He's won 4 Xfinity poles and 1 truck pole, and he's also finished 2nd 4 times. But I think there's still time for Alex to grab a win in the truck race at CTMP. Now I know what you're thinking. What about Marcus Ambrose, or Michael McDowell, Sam Hornish Jr., Robbie Gordon, all the guys that show up in all these road course ringer videos on YouTube? Well, folks, you're mistaken. You're mistaken because they're not ringers. They were all full-time Cup drivers for several seasons that didn't come to NASCAR as ringers, so they're not ringers. Yes, Scott Pruitt is somewhat of an exception, but he did only run 1 season in Cup, and he wasn't exactly a world beater. Please stop referring to Marcus Ambrose as a road course ringer. He's finished 3rd at Bristol and Dover. If you have top 5s at Bristol, like NASCAR's most NASCAR track, you're not a road course ringer. He's just a driver who's good on road courses. Juan Pablo Montoya is not a ringer either. Please, just stop. Just because he only won on road courses doesn't mean he's a road course ringer. He finished 4th at Atlanta in like his 5th Cup race. The one argument I will accept is that there's a couple of these guys who have sort of been a ringer once or twice. Robbie Gordon's the best example. He was hired by Ultra Motorsports at Sonoma in 2001 to drive the 7 car and make a run at winning the race. They were between drivers, he was unemployed. It just made sense. They put a great car together, and he ended up finishing second, which is why Richard Childress hired him on to drive the 31 car when Mike Skinner got hurt, and he ended up having most of his NASCAR success with Richard Childress Racing. So one appearance as a ringer leads to a full-time role. I'm sure a lot of you are asking yourself, why aren't there ringers anymore? Well, first off, there are still a couple in Xfinity and trucks, and even a rare one in Cup, but they're usually driving an underfunded car and have no real shot at a decent finish. In Xfinity and trucks, ringers still have an opportunity to run due to several teams running cars with multiple drivers. For example, Jack Hawksworth drove for Joe Gibbs Racing at Mid-Ohio in 2019. The team used multiple drivers that year, so they could easily plug in a road course guy. AJ Allmendinger is still acting as a ringer for Colleague Racing in an extra car, and Alex Tagliani usually enters the truck race at CTMP each year to try and steal the win. There are a couple of factors affecting the steep decline in road course ringer appearances. The obvious one is the playoff system. It doesn't make sense for teams to replace a full-time driver at road courses when a driver must, by rule, compete in all races to be eligible for the playoffs. I mean, unless NASCAR gives you a waiver because you missed a race, they hand waivers out for pretty much anything. In fact, you can crash guys under caution and get suspended, and NASCAR will still give you a waiver to be eligible for the championship. The second factor is the current economy of racing. Everyone is trying to save money. NASCAR has gotten so ridiculously expensive that we see teams at the back of the grid purposely spending as little money as possible and putt-putting around to try and turn a profit. The top teams are also cutting budget wherever they can. So who's going to field an extra top-of-the-line car for some road course guy to run a race or two? It isn't happening. Not to mention that you can't test anymore, so this guy will be coming into a race weekend with 0 laps in the 3,400-pound stock car, when he's probably used to driving around a 1,300-pound GT3 car. So the best we're going to see is a sports car guy filling in at a team that uses multiple drivers, like Rick Ware Racing, and he's probably not going to be very successful. The final factor is that regular drivers are just so much better on road courses than they were years ago. 25 years ago, there were maybe 6 or 7 dudes that would win all the road course races. Guys like Jeff Gordon, Rusty Wallace, Mark Martin, Ricky Rudd. Half the field had so little experience turning right that they were going into a race at Watkins Glen just trying to survive. Just ride around and get us to the checker. Lots of teams hired guys like Scott Pruitt or Boris Said to fill in for their regular guy who was not good on road courses. It just wasn't something a lot of these guys grew up doing. Nowadays, road courses are part of a lot more developmental series. Guys grow up with karting as part of their lives and become proficient on road courses very young. Look at Chase Elliott. His first truck win came on a road course when he was 17. So many drivers are good road racers now, and sure, some are a lot better than others, but I think a very good portion of the regular field has a chance to bring home a win on a road course race, and that just wasn't the fact 25 years ago. I look at the era of the road course ringer like this. Don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened. If you got to live through this era, it was a great time to be a NASCAR fan. You look forward to these 2 road races every year to see who was going to show up. You got to see a Canadian legend duke it out with Tony Stewart, or an F1 world champion dive bomb the field at Road America. What a time to be alive. You're strange, road course ringers. Congrats.